You're here for the rehearsal.
You ever heard it?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, we'll play something different then.
We'll do how long or something.
Yeah.
We'll do that again. I'll play that again.
Now I
Love
want
that
to do
song.
this one though. 'cause
Oh,
this
my
is
money gone.
such a gem.
Good time to sing.
While there's a break, I just wanted to welcome you all to the East St. Louis Blues Seminar. I'm Rick Gregory. I'm the site supervisor for SWIC's programs in East St. Louis, and we're just really excited about this day. I wanted to point out that the SWIC Foundation is funding the seminar today, and we're thankful to them as well. But at this point, I just want to turn it over to Mary Kay and these guys and get the show on the road. All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rick. I'm Mary Kay. I am on staff and also faculty here at the East St. Louis Center for Southwestern Illinois College, SWIC. I'm also the communications director for the St. Louis Blues Society, and we are now 31 years old. The St. Louis Blues Society's mission is to perpetuate and preserve blues music in and around St. Louis. So this show goes quite well with our mission. The other thing that I'm here today to point out is that Southwestern Illinois College has a wonderful music department. We have 3 different associate degrees, 2 Associate of Arts degrees, 1 in performance and 1 in education, and we have an Associate of Applied Science in Music Technology. And most often people from East St. Louis, kids from East St. Louis are more interested in the music technology because they want to be hip-hop producers. Once they get into the SWIC music department, though, they really open up and find out the different types of music, classical, jazz. Most of our graduates feed into SIU Edwardsville, which is probably one of the most well-known jazz schools in this area. So we're really proud of our music department, and if anyone has any questions about that, we have some information downstairs right now in 1007 on the music auditions that are coming up for the performance program. So at this time, I wanted to introduce our esteemed historian who's going to take us through a historical presentation of early St. Louis blues, including piano blues in St. Louis. After that, we're going to have a panel of 3 musicians who will lead a discussion on the impact of St. Louis blues on U.S. music and kind of give a perspective of when they've traveled around the world, around the United States, what people think of blues in St. Louis, and then also maybe give a little bit of their influences and what their experiences are in the blues music. Then we'll have a short reception, which will lead us downstairs to a music performance by those 3 musicians. Also, with the addition of Marty Speichner, who's setting up and doing the sound for us today, he'll be playing with them, and they'll play at noon to 1 downstairs. So that'll be the entertaining blues, and now we're going to have the academic, very important early blues education. So our historian today is Mr. Ron Edwards. He is, I mentioned the Blues Society earlier, Mr. Edwards is the founding director and chairman emeritus of the St. Louis Blues Society. He's a well-known blues historian in St. Louis. He's also a bottleneck blues guitarist who has worked for 22 years with Henry Townsend, who we consider probably our patriarch of St. Louis blues music. Henry Townsend, the most famous musician that came from St. Louis. He's a syndicated radio host of Nothing But the Blues every Sunday night on KDHX. He's had that show for 31 years, Sunday nights at, am I right?
This is my 28th year.
Oh, I'm sorry, 28 years. Sunday nights at 8 p.m. And if you want to tune into his show, it's like a continuation of this educational experience you'll have today. So thank you very much for coming, and Mr. Edwards.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you. Yeah, it feels like 31 years, Mary Kay. 1,300 Sunday nights, as we say. Today, I really have a treat for you. I brought along a young gentleman who is one of the rarest performers that you're going to hear because the world's full of guitar players. Occasionally you'll find some really good bass players and some drummers, but you rarely anymore hear piano players. And this man has moved here into our community because he is a student of many of the great early styles, and he knows all about these artists, and he knows how to play them. And it's one of the rarest things that I've met in my life because I made a living playing with many of the elder players who were here, who were city blues players. So he's going to give us some examples today of some of the things that I'm talking about. Please welcome Mr. Ethan Leinwand. And right off the top, he will be performing at BB's on March 22nd. It's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a Sunday show, and it is to raise money for Roosevelt Sykes' marker for his grave. It's a really important thing. So Brian Kern will be there, and Ethan and Kurt Landis, a great piano player, played with Albert King. So they will entertain you all afternoon, and this is really a worthwhile cause because you'll find out how important Roosevelt Sykes was to our community. Not so much today, but in the early years, people really associated St. Louis as a piano town. Particularly from the turn of the century on up into the very recent times, it was piano that was the main instrument. And when we first started out, people thought of St. Louis as a ragtime town because, let's go to the next one. Scott Joplin moved here in 1900, 1901. Tom Turpin was here. This whole community was playing this style of music, and the Stark Publishing Company was putting it all in print, and that's how they sold music. So this was the America's center for ragtime music. Now ragtime's a little different kind of sound, and it existed at the same time there was early blues, but we want to make a little different to give you a feel of how different this is than from blues. So in 1899, Joplin published the Maple Leaf Rag, and Ethan's going to play a little bit of it so you get a feel of this is a classical rag piece. Syncopated sound and the two-time signature. Blues invariably is in the 4/4. Also, it's very complex. It's got a lot of parts to it, and it's big. When we think of blues, we think of something that is much shorter, much more direct. We'll have the next one. Most people, when they think of St. Louis, they think of this song, St. Louis Blues, written by W.C. Handy, who was out of Memphis. And they call him the father of the blues, but I would call him the father of published blues because his material wasn't quite what we think of as blues. But he drew upon a tradition that was here in the 1890s. And there were a lot of folk pieces that were centered around St. Louis. The Frankie and Albert, or Frankie Allen and Frankie and Johnny tune, where she shot her lover, that occurred here in St. Louis in 1899. In 1895, the Stagger Lee story actually occurred here also. And there was another one called Duncan and Brady, where Duncan shot a police officer named Brady. and that was in the early 1890s. And each of these became sort of folk tunes. The Frankie and Johnny tune sounded more like blues than anything else. But W.C. Handy was here in 1892, in the autumn of that year and into 93, and he was all but destitute. It was the worst period of his life. He was stranded in St. Louis, and he ended up sleeping underneath the bridge at one point. He had as rough of an existence as he would have in his entire life, and he never forgot that. He wrote a tune called Memphis Blues. It was published in 1912. And it wasn't quite a blues, it's sort of a blues. But he decided, and he sold that for not much money and didn't get a lot out of it. In 1914, he was thinking about his experiences here in St. Louis because he had heard guitar players down on the levees singing a song called "I Walked All the Way to East St. Louis. All I had was one poor dime." And this particular line stuck in his mind, and the sound of it, which was certain notes. And these notes are what we call the flatted third and the seventh. They're the blue notes. Blues is a combination musically of a certain scale, which comes mostly from West Africa. But the thing is that it's not that do, re, mi, fa, the sound of music scale, the European scale. It's got a couple notes in it that are flat and very distinctive. So with that, it was put together with some European chords, and it finally developed into what we call 12-bar blues. And that's distinguishable because it takes a line like "Sun's gonna shine on my back door someday," and repeats it. "Sun's gonna shine on my back door someday," and it ends with "The wind's gonna rise and blow my blues away." So this structure was of a line and a repeat of a line and then a conclusion is what sort of defines what 12-bar blues was. Well, when he wrote St. Louis Blues in 1914, the tango was all the rage. And he was a working musician, so you played what people wanted to hear. So he incorporated the tango into his blues tune. So this song is a 12-bar with a 16-bar, a longer piece in the middle with more 12 bars. And it has a little bit more of a lighter feel to it. So Ethan is going to play a little bit of St. Louis Blues with the bounce. So it sounds a little bit like blues, but Ethel Waters got a hold of it, and she began to sing it in the early 20s, and it sounded more and more like blues. Bessie Smith did it in 1925, and most of us consider that was the ultimate version of it with Louis Armstrong, and it was sung slowly. And it's a song that meant to be sung by a woman because it's from her perspective. But music was all about publishing. The way you sold music was you wrote it, and then somebody bought it, and they tried to play it. It's the same period in which cylinders were out and one-sided records, and eventually by 1920, records were becoming more of the way to sell music. But there was nothing in the African American market at all until this lady came along. Her name was Renee Smith, and they called her the Queen of the Blues. She was, you can look at her ensemble, she was a vaudeville performer, and she had basically an ensemble that's a little bit more like a jazz ensemble. And this was in the summer of 1920 that a man named Perry Bradford convinced the OK record company, let's put her on record singing a blues. It was also a little variation of a blues, not as down home as we think of it. But this changed the course of musical history for blues itself, because they had no idea that this would sell. And as a treat, I brought the real thing today. This is the first blues record ever made in an original cover. And the reason I have it is because they sold 800,000 copies of this at $1 a piece. A loaf of bread was 12 cents. So you can sort of think, here's two songs at probably $20, $25 in today's music. That was a lot of money. But America went crazy buying this crazy blues with the name of it. Now, what that did was then set off an entire run on women singers. Any singer had been on a vaudeville stage that they thought, hey, whether you sing blues or not, you're going to sing one, and we're going to put it on a record. And they did that for a couple of years and dug up Alberta Hunter and Trixie Smith and a whole bunch of, a lot of ladies named Smith. But they finally got down to, in 1923, three women that would really change blues. They found Ida Cox, who was the uncrowned queen of the blues. They found Ma Rainey, who had been the original performer, first hearing blues in Missouri in 1902 and put it in her show. She was the greatest blues performer of that time before the war. She worked in tent shows. One quick story about her is after she got on record, on the Paramount record, she would appear on stage. You would hear this band playing, and you would hear her singing. But there would be a massive Victrola cabinet. And the doors would open and she would enter singing. No microphones, no sound systems. And you could hear a pin drop in the audience because they were so focused on her. Same time period as a young woman named Bessie Smith, who became the Empress of the Blues, and is the best known of all the women singers, one of the greatest women singers of all time. Now, they played, the women singers. No men were on record until 1925. But in St. Louis, the ragtime players were moving off of the stools and the blues players were getting on them. In the area of town that was really important, let's think of Union Station in St. Louis. Just to the west of it, on the same side, was a theater built called the Booker T. Washington Theater. This had been also up there to Chestnut, was the area where all the ragtime was happening. Turpin and the over on Delmar, what we call Deep Morgan, is where Scott Joplin's house was. But that theater opened in 1913, and it gradually had more and more black vaudeville acts and then blues acts. But the blues players in St. Louis played a different style of blues than what you heard there. And so Ethan's going to play a little bit of something that might have been done by Henry Brown a little bit later in the 20s. Listen to the contrast of this from that St. Louis blues thing.
Keep Morgan style.
Now that's a little more bluesy, a little bit more what we think of. Let's go to the next slide. This is the inside of the Booker T. Washington Theater. So if you were standing on stage, that's what it would look like. I couldn't find a single picture anywhere of the outside of it. It went from 1913 to 1930. Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey, Ethel Waters, all the major figures, classic women blues singers, appeared in this theater in St. Louis. And Market Street, the length of it, particularly from roughly Jefferson all the way down to about 12th Street, was the main blues section in St. Louis in the early 1920s. Up north of that slightly was Biddle Street, and there were several sections, the Chestnut area and so on. That was the St. Louis part. The East St. Louis part was 3rd Street, the north part of it, and what they called the Valley. None of this exists anymore. We drove, those of us who came from St. Louis drove over it on the highway because it was all taken out and knocked down so these highways could be built. The PWA knocked a lot of it down in the mid-1930s, but it's been gone for a long time. But it was an incredible scene that was here on the east side, and it was open very late, or no restrictions at all. So the blues players played over there, and they played over here. And the next person we're going to look at is one of the most important people ever appear in St. Louis, is a man named Lonnie Johnson. And as a guitarist, he is one of the greatest blues guitarists that's ever lived. He was so advanced in the 1920s that there was no one else, not even Blind Blake or Blind Lemon, any of them, that could play the material that he played. He came out from New Orleans. His family had died in the influenza epidemic right after the First World War. He and his brother came here, played on the riverboats, but that was limiting, those kind of ensembles. But what he really did is he playing Katy Reds and these other places in East St. Louis. And there he played in duets and trios, and he played blues. And the piano and the guitar were the main instruments here. Now this man is also credited as the father of jazz guitar, in the sense that he and Eddie Lang, who is probably one of the best known guitar players in America. Because in the early 20s, you had a lot of bands, people played banjos because they were loud. The guitar had no amplification. It was a lot harder to hear that. Lonnie started playing a 12-string because of the volume of this thing and the boom of it. But when he got together with Eddie Lang, they made records, and it was Lonnie Johnson who played the lead, not Eddie Lang. Eddie Lang was soloed a couple times, but he mostly played rhythm because that's how great he was. These records made in the late 20s are considered the beginning, the origins of jazz guitar. Let me tell you a quick little Johnson story, because we all think of Smith as being a big deal with all these women singers named Smith, and that's a great name in blues, and it still is today with one of the people that's going to be on our panel. But the #1 name in blues is Johnson. And it has been since the 1920s, when we had Johnsons coming out of the clubs. We had Lonnie Johnson and his brother, James Steady Roll Johnson. They both played guitar, piano, mandolin, violin. Lonnie Johnson was a violinist when he came here. But Lonnie won a contest at that Booker T. Washington Theater. He won this contest 18 weeks in a row. He was the greatest performer here. And he won a recording contract with OK Records. And he recorded in the end of 1925. And that's really important because he and the appearance of Blind Lemon changed blues history, where it was no longer simply classic women blues singers. You had guitarists and piano players and men playing blues on records who could sell it. Well, Lonnie married a woman here that same year, and her name was Mary Johnson. And she was a singer. There were a lot of women singers here in St. Louis. Most of them we don't know them anymore, but she was one of the better known, and she really could sing. So she was billed as signifying Mary Johnson. So that's 3 in that family. Then with the next one, There was a piano player here. His name was James Stump Johnson. And he did a really famous tune called The Ducks Yes, 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 which was a hokum tune. It was a little dirty, a little risque, but a massive tune that came out of St. Louis here, got known for. And the lyric is the mother killed a rooster, thought it was a duck. She put it on the table with his legs sticking up. The kids went and got a cup and a glass, and they poured the liquor out of his yes, yes, yes. That really sold. So anyway, Stump Johnson's brother is one. I don't have a picture of him. His name was Jesse Johnson. He was one of the most important people here because he had the deluxe record shop right on the same street near the Booker T. Washington Theater. Henry remembered going in there, many times. But what it was, he became an agent for the recording companies. So he started putting all this talent from St. Louis on record. He got most of them hooked up with the companies. So we had Lonnie and James Steadyroll and Mary, and then we had James Stump Johnson and Jesse Johnson, and Jesse married a woman named Edith North, who became Edith North Johnson. She worked at the record shop with him and said, I can sing as well as these other women, why don't you put me on record? Well, he was the right guy to marry. He put her on record, she was good. So she was recording also. So you had them all recording here in St. Louis. But she made a record with a man named Roosevelt Sykes. And he's up next. And this is the figure I was talking about. Well, the song she did was called The Honey Dripper. And that became his name. Much of his life, he had other names on records. But he came here, and in 1929, Ethan's going to play a song in a minute that's really important with him. But the gist of the story is that when you made a record, you got paid for the record. That was it. Goodbye. You didn't get royalties. You didn't have other material. So what happened with Sykes was he thought, wait a minute. I'll just go to a different company and use a different name. So in 1929, he was Roosevelt Sykes. The same year, he went to a different company and became Willie Kelly, which was a family name. And then he thought, I can do this again. So in 1930, he was Willie Kelly, and then he became Dobby Bragg, and he changed his style a little bit. And then the conclusion of the story is that he went to another label, and he was looking for a name, so he became Easy Papa Johnson, and the seventh of the Johnsons in St. Louis, recording at the end of the decade. Now, Sykes is the most important piano player from the late 20s because he was also an agent, but when people got recorded, people like St. Louis Jimmy Oden, when he did Going Down Slow in the early 40s, Sykes is the piano player. When Walter Davis first played, Sykes is the piano player. Because even though these guys could play piano, why? When you had this man. He was, in a way, like Lonnie Johnson was on guitar. He was of that caliber. He moved here when he was 3 out of Arkansas. But he brought a song here, and he recorded it both as Roosevelt Sykes and as Willie Kelly. And the real problem that he had was that in 1930 he discovered that Willie Kelly was more popular than Roosevelt Sykes. So when Henry Townsend went with him, sometimes he had to go out and be Willie Kelly. When they go out of town, well, we want Willie Kelly, we don't want Roosevelt Sykes. So he had to be one of the other ones but he did make a living at it. Ethan's going to play, this is one of the great themes of early piano blues. And it has existed because Sykes did it as the 44 blues and he did it as Willie Kelly's blues, and he put lyrics to it. I carried my 44 so long it made my shoulder sore. And it showed up even with Howlin' Wolf and all these other people. But this piano is a really difficult piano. Sort of separated the kids from the grown-ups if you could play this. So Ethan's going to play a little bit of 44 blues. that's the sound of blues in St. Louis in the late 1920s. St. Louis has been the second biggest blues town in the world after Chicago, but in the 20s, there were more great players here than there were in Chicago. Mostly St. Louis is associated with these musicians because we're on the rail lines that run north and south. Most of the lines in America run east-west. But the Illinois Central and the Mobile and Ohio, the M&O, both had branches that came here. So people coming from the south would come here, particularly, as you know, all of the rail lines here in East St. Louis, they would come to East St. Louis. St. Louis, Henry used to say, it was a good town if you were rich, it was a good town if you were poor. You could live here. And it also was more like the South. This is the heartland. It's sort of, I always think of it as kind of like Memphis with industry. It's closer to that than a Midwestern town like Chicago, and thank goodness it's not generally as cold. So people would come here on their way up there, or they would stay here. But in the late 20s to the early 30s, this community was thriving, and it was just full of piano players and guitar players. Here's Charlie Jordan, he's one of them. He's a guy that played his own records. He also played with Sykes to begin with, and then later he played for a long time with Petey Wheatstraw. Here's another one named Clifford Gibson. He and Henry Townsend used to go to the east side to see Lonnie Johnson play. They were all in awe of him. And then let's go one more. Here is a picture from the 40s of my friend Henry Townsend. Now Henry was, as he used to say, he was sort of the guitar man. He's the only bluesman in the world to record in 9 decades, starting in 1929. We made a record right at the beginning of the year 2000 so that we would get him into the 9th decade. B.B. King will have to record in 2020 to catch up to Henry, which is such a rare thing. But Henry played, he learned piano from Sykes, and he worked with Walter Davis, he worked with Aaron Pinetop Sparks. They did the original version of Every Day I've Got the Blues. He was with Big Joe Williams when he did Baby Please Don't Go. He was with John Lee Sonny Boy Williamson standing there in the studio when he recorded Good Morning Little Schoolgirl. This community had a phenomenal amount of players. There were many women like Alice Moore and Mary Johnson and so on who were performing, but oftentimes it was a guitar and piano combination that was really important, and that's what defined St. Louis. Nationally in music, there was a duo called Leroy Carr and Scrapper Blackwell. They'd started in 28, and they were in Indianapolis. But in the early 30s, in 1932, they were living here in East St. Louis and often played in St. Louis. And their urban style had a phenomenal effect upon blues, because blues developed from just a single player, single piano player, single guitar player, to oftentimes to duets. And that was a transitional thing, and St. Louis was known for that. Now Henry always did his own material. He made it up. Seldom did any songs from the past. He would play Cairo, which is an old guitar part from this from the late 20s here, and he played one song that Roosevelt did from 1930 called "All My Money Gone," and because it was a song of the Depression, and it had a great meaning to Henry because he lived through that time period, and they all did, and practically everything came apart by 1932, but really started in 1930. So Henry would do that. The last concert I played with him on a major stage was at the Chicago Blues Festival. It was dedicated to Roosevelt Sykes. And Henry asked me, "What do you want to play?" I said, "We talked about All My Money Gone." That was the last song we played, and it was the only song played by anybody at that festival that knew Sykes. So, Henry had played with him and was taught how to play piano by him. So Ethan and I are going to give you a little version of that song without lyrics. And I'm going to play in a style that appeared slightly later. St. Louis was not known as a slide guitar town until the appearance, I believe, of Robert Nighthawk in 1936. He was playing in the style of Tampa Red in open tunings. different than he would later on. But he teamed up with a bunch of players here, including Big Joe Williams and so on. But let's give you just a little bit of a touch of it so you can get a feel. If you want to go somewhere, this is what you're going to hear. It's guitar and piano. And we'll try to give it a little bit of that bounce that Sykes had. People talk about blues dying. I'll tell you what is rare. That. That's the city blues from the 20s and 30s, and it's the one thing that you rarely hear anymore. That's why I'm thrilled that Ethan has come into town, because there's a younger generation finally playing this music. And I learned it from Henry, who learned it from Roosevelt, and Henry was here at that time. Let's go through a few other people real quick so you know who they are. Here's a man. This is why St. Louis was great. He was one of the biggest selling artists on the Bluebird label in the 1930s. His name was Walter Davis. And when other people were not selling, he started in 1930, but Bluebird came along in 34, and that was a cheap label. You couldn't sell records at 75 cents anymore. Nobody could afford it. So Bluebird came out at 35 cents. But they started putting great blues on it. St. Louisans got on this thing, and he would steadily, for the next decade, sell records, every catalog. A very distinct player. Ethan to play just a real short piece. Every time, practically everything he played sounded like it was in minor tuning.
I'll do my best.
Just a little bit. Very distinctive. The only other person I've heard in my life play that was Henry Townsend. And it was because he and I got talking about it in front of a festival, and I could have hit myself in the head for talking about it. Because he got up on the stage and he started reeling them off. And Davis was the hardest person to play with. I asked Henry, how did you play with him? Because he played things that were like 6 bars long, and another 6 bar, that was a 12 bar. It was really difficult. And Henry said it was how I learned to play with Henry, which was never really 12 bars, it was however long was necessary. But he said, when I got lost, I just started playing the tonic until I found him. And if I didn't, I just kept playing the tonic, you know. So when I first started playing with Henry, that's what I did. And it worked. So let's move on then. This is Big Joe Williams. He was here. There was a woman named St. Louis Bessie Mae Smith that he was hanging out with. But Big Joe Williams was a 9-string guitar player. He was a great figure, went in and out of St. Louis most of his life, a traveler. He was here for a while in the late 30s, but he played with all of the performers here. Henry recorded with him. He was unique as a guitar player. And one thing real interesting that Henry and I used to talk about was that Robert Johnson is a young guy that got deified somehow when his records came out in the 60s and the rockers picked up on. He was a wonderful artist. When he came to St. Louis, he played with Henry Townsend. So Henry knew him, played with him. So he had the right opinion, and we used to get out. You can't say it on radio. People come beat down the door at the station. Henry's comment was, he was great, but he was no Big Joe Williams. And that's how important this guy was. So then the next one. Here is the most important harmonica player, probably in blues. There were players before, there were a lot of them down in Memphis, they played the whole time. This man's name was John Lee Sonny Boy Williamson. Came out of Jackson, Tennessee. Most of the harp players came out of Tennessee, they were important. Hammy Nixon was his predecessor, Noah Lewis. But this man took the harmonica and brought it to the forefront as an instrument. You would sing and then play harmonica, not just play the whole time. He changed the concept of harmonica. He played in a different position, had a deeper sound. He had a very distinctive lisp. When he sang, it wasn't as prominent. He and Henry and Walter Davis and Robert Nighthawk and Big Joe all took a Model A Ford that was Henry's up to Aurora, Illinois in 1937. Henry had 4 tires on the back of the car because the highway was all gravel. And they finally had the guitars on the top. They finally made it, and they made 23 recordings in one day. And these recordings are historic. And this was the first recordings with Sonny Boy. But they were all living in St. Louis. So, one more. And they were all playing on both the St. Louis side and the East St. Louis. It's hard to find anything that shows East St. Louis, so we'll go ahead. And they all knew this guy. His name was Petey Wheatstraw. He made his first record in 1930. He was billed as the Devil's Son-in-Law, known also as the High Sheriff of Hell. But he played, as most of them did, both guitar and piano. This is the only picture of him, but we think of him as a piano player. He made a few sessions with guitar early on. But this man, when you think of influential people, he had a vocal style in which he sang this "ooh, well, well," as it was part of his vocal thing. All the blues players in America picked up on it. It was just a rage. He was so popular. He died when he was 39 years old in 1941, killed over here in an accident in the East St. Louis. He lived here, and by the time he died, he had made as many recordings as Bessie Smith. That's how important this man was and how much he had recorded. Walter Davis had made 150 sides, and he made almost 200 if you include him as an accompanist. And Ethan is one of the very few people that can play one of his stomps. So we'll end this early section with this. Song. You know, people had a sound and you could recognize them. That to me is the mark of a great artist. When Albert King's guitar, when he started playing guitar, you knew it was Albert King. You knew it was B.B. King. You knew him right away. And they developed their own thing. Memphis Slim, Brunsey, all these players. But St. Louis had all these musicians in through the 1930s. But we'll go on here because I just want to say a couple of quick things to introduce our panel. And this is a little segue. Many blues players came here in the 1940s. The generation of all the people I knew, Doc Terry and Tommy Bankhead and Boo Davis, who is still around, and all of the East Side players that played a certain style of blues. In the mid-1950s, a young man named Ike Turner came up here, and he brought his band, the Kings of Rhythm, and they were over here. They were actually up in Madison. But he sent for Clayton Love and a group of musicians that were primarily northern Mississippi and mostly around Memphis came here to produce music. Little Milton came here and started up a label called the Bobbin label. Got all these people on this label. Well, this guy, who is a dear friend of all of us, and all three panel members that you will meet today performed with this man at one time or another. His name was Oliver Sane. His grandfather was Dan Sane, one of the Beale Street Sheiks, one of the great acts of the 20s. His stepfather was Willie Love, who was a big name. Made records on the trumpet label. I'll be down at your burying, driving around in my V8 Ford was the one that people remember him with. But Oliver was a drummer, played with him, and they played with Rice Miller, the second Sonny Boy Williamson. He also played with Alan Wolf. They eventually came up here. He came up with Milton and Ike, and he put his own group together. After he worked with Milton, then he put together the Oliver Sane Soul Review. And he had a young woman with him, and her name was Pontella Bass. And they recorded records and got them out on chests in various places. In 1965, she had a song that went number 4 on the charts, and it was the biggest. Chess Records hadn't had a million seller in 10 years. It was Rescue Me, and Fontella Bass did it, and he produced it. We also had, in the early 50s, the great, we'll go to the next one. Here's Oliver, here is Little Milton Campbell, who was here, and the great Johnny Johnson, who came here in 1952, the John's Trio. He and Silver Cloud, who was Rudy Coleman and the Rhythm Rockers, used to play in East St. Louis, and Oliver and they'd trade gigs. Well, there was a young kid that kept wanting to come and play guitar with him, and his name was Charles Berry. And eventually, through a crazy circumstance, he started playing with Johnny, and then he became the big rock and roll. So America associates St. Louis with rock and roll, but it's because he played with this man, and he is the inspiration for the song Johnny Be Good. One real unusual point, that song is on the Voyager spacecraft. So Chuck Berry, it's estimated that that piece of music will last 1 billion years. So as St. Louis is out in space, it's out of our solar system now. One more and we're done. Same time period, a man named Albert King came over here, served in '56, was living in Brooklyn, Illinois, and he recorded for the Bobbin label. He became really well known in the later '60s when he recorded down in Memphis. But he had a distinct style, and he was in this community, came here many times, and we're going to hear a little story about him in just a minute, because the next one, and I hope you can see this, here is Albert King, and this is a young Texas guitar player that brought all the rockers into blues in the mid-'80s named Stevie Ray Vaughan. Well, there's a real good-looking guy here playing bass, and it's pretty dark to see, and he's on our panel today. So I want to invite our 3 members of the panel, and we're going to introduce them, and each one is going to talk a little bit about St. Louis. I'm sorry that I've shorted up on the late part. Yes?
Yeah, this guy was a bass player for these guys in this picture here.
That's what
Well, he's coming up on the panel.
Yeah, oh, okay.
Yeah.
There's the light shining off the Gus's nose right
Oh,
there.
okay.
That's the only
He looks
shot where
even
you
better
can
in
see
person.
Gus.
So I'll introduce them. They'll come and sit up here, and I'm going to ask them a couple questions, and we'll have a little fun. They'll tell you some fun stories about music. First off, let me introduce a man who was from East St. Louis, got his start playing rhythm and blues, a bass player, 15 years old. You know, the great ones all start younger than that, really, which he did. But every blues player in this community has felt it's been a privilege to be on stage with this man, because he is our consummate bass player in terms of working with national acts such as Albert King, Shirley Brown. He has worked with Johnny Johnson and Oliver, and everyone that you can think of in this community has been on a stage to play with this individual, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how it was growing up in East St. Louis and the club scene. So let me introduce first, to come up to the table, the one and only Mr. Gus Thornton. Gus, we'll have you come sit over there, and I've got a mic that will, in fact, we'll bring all 3 members up. And why don't we use this one? This is wireless, and you can just pass it around. Yeah, like that. Then I want to bring up a lady who is really the queen of soul here in St. Louis. I enjoyed talking with her last night so much about so many different stories. We'll see if we get with this. But she is an individual who also grew up in East St. Louis, but she got her start singing the kind of music that you associate with Oliver saying. in the soul and the blues. And she has been an international performer who has been recognized as a soul performer, as a blues performer, as a jazz performer, and she has sung gospel all her life. So she is an all-around individual who's played the Apollo Theater in New York. She has been on Good Morning America, and she was the star of Singapore for a long period of time. Please welcome Miss Renee Smith. You want to sit in the middle? Wherever you like. And last but not least, a young gentleman who comes to us from the jazz field. He is a major guitar player in this town. The rest of us have a hard time tuning this guy's guitar, I think. But he comes from a musical family. He went to he's educated, went to the Berklee School of Music in Boston, came back here, ended up working with a Chicago bluesman named Willie Clayton. Had great experience as a session man down at Ace Records in Jackson, Mississippi. He's been in New Orleans, been in New York. But he spent 3 years with Oliver Sane the last years and has been known as a great all-around jazz player, performing with all the Willie Aikens, everybody of consequence here, but also a real bluesman. Please welcome Mr. Eric Slaughter. So, I'm going to start with you, Gus. You just hold that up in front of you. I don't have to tell musicians how to hold a microphone, really. But one thing I couldn't give you really a flavor of, and I was talking to Gus about this, I thought it'd be interesting if he talked a little bit about why he's a bass player, but really when he got started as a musician on a regular basis, some of the places he played and what it was like to play in those places in East St. Louis, because you don't hear about these places anymore. And you started in a band when you were 15 years old?
Right. Well, actually, I started with a gospel group when I was 14.
Oh, okay.
But I started doing, well, we were doing some of the kind of the blues and the R&B stuff around town with friends of mine, but we wasn't really officially a real band. We were just trying to get it together. You know how it is when you get like young kids that, you know somebody in the neighborhood that can play, and you kind of gather. That's kind of what we did. And then somebody told the guys in the gospel group, it was a quartet that were called the Illinois Specials, and they were, here in East St. Louis, before I actually started playing. And they told them that I could play, so they came by my house one day and asked me if I would come over and, start playing guitar with them. And they had another guy that, was a guitar player that wanted to sing. So, he was also showing me some things on the guitar. And so we did that for a while. And then we had a group that we actually was officially a band, with some of the guys from my high school. And, we started to, rehearsing, and we had one amplifier that we played. Everybody played through one amp. We had the microphone plugged into the one amp. We used that until it blew up. And, one of the guys that was in the group was working down at the community center, the South End Center, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you people may not remember that, but they were starting a group. And so they needed a rhythm section, so they asked if he came over and told me about it, so I said, well, let's go over there and see if maybe we could be the rhythm section for these guys. So we went over there, and they liked us, so this group was called the Young Disciples, and we did this up until I was about 21, but we worked other little things around the city too. Worked with a guy named Little Soul for a little while playing lead guitar, but basically I played the bass guitar because there are so many other guitar players around town, and they all wanted to play guitar, and I wanted to get a band going, so I just said, okay, I'll play the bass, so we did that. And so we Well, we worked until, well, let me say this, and I know we were talking about not necessarily getting into too many details, but the group we did, well, I met Renee in the group for one thing. She was 15 years old and I was 16. And I don't think she remembers me. You don't remember me, do you? Well, I don't see how that could be. Yeah, I was older. But we got a lot of learning experience in the band. We got to, we had people that would come down and mentor us. After we worked for a while, we started getting grants from the city so we could hire people to come in and entertain us, and give us our little personal workshops. We had Lou Rouse to come in, we had Brother Jack McDuff, we had Hank Crawford. I know a lot of these people are not necessarily blues, but it was music, and it was so inspirational for the blues. And we would play a lot of the clubs in East St. Louis. We would do the 20 Grand Club. I don't know if anybody here remembers the 20 Grand. It was behind the officer's funeral home. We was there with, and then we would do the Little Green Apple, which was downtown on Collinsville Avenue. And do you remember that? No. Okay. And then there was another club that we would do our blues stuff in. It was the Fountain Blue. And these were, somewhat similar. What really made these clubs different was the fact that, we were, it was more blues orientated. And, we didn't have the high tech. It was really, it was just different. I wish that, you would really be there. You have to, almost have to be there to really see and experience, how it was different from the clubs today. But, there are still, it's people that are trying to have clubs that present the blues nowadays. So, I'm still glad to see it's kind of going on. I'm going to
what time did you start playing in most of those clubs? The East St. Louis clubs had different times, right?
Well, yeah, Tubby's Red Room, yeah. Also, there was, we would start about, we used to do the Blue Note, and we would start like 1:30 in the morning. And there was another club called the SWIC House, which was probably a couple of blocks away from Albert King's house. And I was there with a guy named Jerry Walker. And we had, we would start probably about 2:30 in the morning and go till daylight. A lot of these clubs we would go in and wouldn't come out till daylight. And sometimes they would start so late that we could do clubs in St. Louis and then come over here and, start all over again. And that was one of the real nice things about it. We would get a lot of people that would come over after, they had finished partying in St. Louis.
Let me go ahead to Renee. And we were talking about a dear friend of ours, since we were talking before, about Oliver Sane. And Renee told me a wonderful story about her first experience on the stage with Oliver. And I think in many ways, when people are really young, you get up and you do things. But every once in a while, something happens and you look back upon it. It wasn't so much fun then, but later on, it's funny. And it's something we all went through one time or another. So when you met Oliver, you really wanted to sing with him.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Wake up, I'm awake. Of course, Ron, I tell you, when I first, Oliver Sane would perform every Tuesday and Thursday at a little club called The Place. And I would go faithfully to see Oliver sing. I wanted to sing so bad. At the time, he had several singers, but at this particular time, he had Miss Shirley Brown. So Miss Shirley didn't show up. I was there. So they asked me, would you sing? You want to sing? Oh, Lord, I thought I was going to New York or somewhere. Yes, I want to sing. So I want you to sing Rock Steady. Honey, I got up there, got that microphone, stood there, and forgot every lyric to the song. So therefore, I didn't sing it. I'm standing looking real crazy. But Oliver didn't hold it against me. He stayed in with me. I never got a chance to go up and sing with him again, though. I don't understand that. But later on down the years, I got a chance to be his vocalist, and that was the dream of my life. Really wanted to sing with Oliver Sane, and I got the opportunity. I remember one night that we played at the zoo, and it was just they had the cart that would take you to where they wanted you to play. So you park your cars down at the bottom of the hill. So we all got on the cart and we rode up the hill to the big place there and went on in and we played. And break time, Oliver decides, well, I've left something in the car, so I'm gonna go back down the hill and I'm gonna get it. So Oliver walked back to his car, all the way back down that hill to his car. On the way back, the lights went out. Oliver Sane is walking through the zoo in the dark. Oliver, it was so funny because he walked, it seems like for hours we were looking for him. We out there hollering, Oliver, where are you? Finally somebody, I guess they showed him how to get back, but Oliver says, his word was, that thing there. I was walking down there and the things went out, the lights, they went out. I said, it went out, Oliver? He said, yeah. And I heard all kind of things. He was actually shivering. I heard all kind, I guess the monkeys and everybody was having a good time with him out there. So when he got back, he said, yeah, I was scared. I said, well, settle down, sit down. But it was so funny after we found him. But Oliver Sane told so many stories that I would have to, and they were true. It's just the way that he said them. It's the way that he presented them to you. So I would have to leave the table because I couldn't sing after laughing so hard with Oliver. I have to leave away from him. But Oliver was a good guy. I loved Oliver, and I miss him much. On Oliver Sane.
Wonderful. And Oliver Sane, all of us knew him. He was the calmest person you ever met in your life. Nothing ever seemed to rattle him. That's why when Renee told that zoo story last time, I was talking to her, I said, you got to tell that. Because Oliver, for the most part, nothing bothered him. He'd show up, nothing seemed to work, no problem. And he played so many jobs in his life that, he was just a consummate professional. But he also was the kind of individual that you wanted to work with because you never had problems. Now, let me ask Eric, since we're, I'm sorry. We're coming back. Okay. Because Eric, let's go to the talk about Oliver for a minute because Eric worked with him in I think it was the last 3 years.
Yeah, I got the call from a guy named James McKay, who is now actually the musical director for the Temptations, and he called me to come play with Oliver, and I didn't really know. Like, I came from a musical family. My aunt is a singer named Marcia Evans, and I grew up going to see her band, and that's how I got a sound for music. So I always had music in the house, but I didn't really know about Oliver's legacy and all the people that he had recorded, like Fontella Bass, and he's responsible for documenting so much great St. Louis music. But like he said, he was such a humble, like calm, funny person that you wouldn't know how much of an icon he was. So he was almost like my uncle, and he kind of took me under his wing, and we both, Oliver, what people don't know about Oliver is that he was a great jazz fan. Like, he loved Louis Jordan, and he loved Dexter Gordon, and people like that. So we would talk about jazz a lot, and if the house was like not so full, we would play a standard or something. He said, you remember this? Because he played piano, and he plays a very good piano player, blues style, and played the saxophone. But yeah, I really miss him a lot. I remember this one time we had this gig, and it was out over on this side of the river, I think, and the club was in this cornfield, surrounded by corn, and so it was like you couldn't see where the streets were going because all this corn was in the way, and the whole band was late. And so when I got there, the club owner had this beautiful wife or girlfriend, and Oliver was like, ooh, I like that, look at that, And so we get to the end of the night, we played the whole gig. It was a great gig, but we started about an hour late. And the club owner was like, yeah, I love the band, and the crowd was happy. And when he got to get paid, the girlfriend, the beautiful girlfriend, got in his ear and said, let me talk to you, and took him in the back. It turns out she docked us like half the pay. so after we got the buddy, Oliver came to me, he's like, I don't like her anymore. But yeah, he was a funny guy, and I really am indebted to him and people like Willie Clayton for really putting me on and put me in a situation where I could hear people like Shirley Brown, Tyrone Davis, and really learn from them by seeing them, you know, up close and playing with great people like that and great people like this. I mean, these are St. Louis treasures, and unfortunately, I don't think we give them the respect that they're due sometimes. I mean, as a city, and so yeah, I'm just grateful to be up here with them. So back to.
Again, because one topic that we had here was really to talk about the perception of St. Louis. And that's one of the reasons we were talking about Oliver, because Oliver was known in Europe, and when you think of it, people in other parts of the world know all about St. Louis. They knew who Oliver was, they knew who all these musicians were. They would come here and they would give anything to hear the kind of music that was played here on a daily, weekly basis through the years. Here we kind of take it for granted. We all grew up with it, so it's just something that was here. And then when you get to know musicians, as you understand, are simply people. No matter how famous they are, they're people. And other players know them as people. And you kind of lose sight of how great a reputation some individuals truly have. And Oliver Saint is a man that represented St. Louis in as great a way as anybody I can think of in my life. And he was our treasure. We appreciate him, but he was an ambassador for St. Louis. People also associated Albert King with St. Louis. And he was, I guess we'd call him a little different kind of ambassador.
A little bit.
But Gus started working with him. You started working with him in '77?
Right, 1977. It was about a week before Thanksgiving. And the way I got the gig with them, you know, I had a band, and we had worked together for maybe about 2 or 3 years. Then, you know, the band eventually broke up, but the couple of the guys that was in the group had joined Albert's band, and so what happened was they were rehearsing over at the projects here in the Gumper homes, and you know, I said, well, you know, you guys aren't going to rehearse over there. I want to go and just hang out. So I went over there, and they rehearsed, and I got to you know, talk to Albert, and he let me play his guitar a little bit, which was real, you know, uplifting for me to be playing Albert King's guitar. And so we talked and got along well. And then after, you know, about a day, you know, his band leader called me and asked me if I would join the band. And at first I didn't want to do it because a friend of mine was in the band. And, you know, the guy said that, you know, if I didn't join the band, well, you know, he's going to leave the band anyway. So I said, okay, I'll join the band. Plus they were going to California. We was in, you know, serious snow here in, you know, East St. Louis at that time. And, you know, we're going to California. I'd never been to California, and I always wanted to go to California. So I joined the band. And so, you know, I stayed with them for about 3 years. Then I left the group and for about 4 and went back. Now, I'm sure you probably got some questions you might want to ask me about some of this before I get too deep.
Albert was a little bit different of a band leader than Oliver in terms of, he was a lot tougher to hang out with, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, the thing is with Albert, you know, Albert would be tough because, you know, a lot of times, you know, you put groups together and, you know, guys can occasionally, some people can, you know, have this lack of discipline and don't want to give you the respect that you needed. And Albert would demand that, you know. But, you know, if Albert, you know, once he realized that you were, you know, a part of the a group and wasn't there to cause any kind of ruckus or anything, then, you know, you could get along with him. And that's the experience that I had with him. But when we were over in the projects, you know, we got along really well. And, you know, so I get on the bus and we're on our way to California, and he's talking, you know, to me real good. And, you know, he's the first person to tell me about the drummer Kenny Rice. And so, you know, everything's going real good. We get to California, and we have a little rehearsal in the hotel rooms, and you know, he liked everything I did. And then we gets on stage, and he just has a fit. You know, nothing I could do was right. You know, and you know, it was kind of you know, it's real embarrassing because I really didn't expect all of that. But you know, after a while, you know, before we got home, you know, I said I was going to quit the band. But you know, we had to do gigs from there all the way back to Chicago before we got home. It seems like every gig he'd get a little nicer and nicer. So by the time we got back to you know, East St. Louis, I said, okay, I'm gonna, you know, I just hang out for a while. But you know, Albert, you know, he realized that, you know, I wasn't gonna be, you know, the type of guy that was gonna cause him problems. So you know, we really learned to get along well. He's got a reputation for being a hard guy to work with, and he can be. But if he knows you, and he knows you're really a part of the crew, you know, he can be easy. You know, I had absolutely no problems. We became like the best of friends.
One other thing I wanted to say about Albert King was that when he went out to the Fillmore West, all these people said, you need to get this guy out here because all the English rockers and all these English blues youngsters, they were all playing in the style of Albert King. Eric Clapton and all these groups were. So he went out there and absolutely became a star out on the in San Francisco. And one of the things he did was he played just as loud as the rock and rollers did. They thought they were loud. Albert King was loud. So, you know, it was like, sit down, I can turn my guitar up. But that's why a young man named Stevie Ray Vaughan admired him so much, and I think he's one that played that style closer than anyone else did. And Gus was at a session. It was a remarkable thing that's come out all these years, because Gus recorded with Albert. But this session came out in which they were in a studio, and Albert and Gus and the band played songs back and forth with Stevie Ray Vaughan. You knew Stevie Ray Vaughan before that, though, didn't you?
Yeah, Stevie used to come over to the gig. You know, we would go down to Anton's in Austin, Texas and play, and he would come over and sit in with us, and then he would take me over to his gig to sit in with him in Double Trouble. So, you know, we just kind of hung out there, and you know, he didn't have his records out at that time, so you know, it's good that I got to know him, you know, before, you know, he had his success and after. And he didn't change. He was always really, you know, a great guy.
Well, and he showed great deference to Albert, showed how much he admired him and how much people, you know, learned from him. Let's talk international now, because Renee is an international artist here who became the St. Louis Queen of Soul, not only here, but in Singapore. She was talking about how this happened. So they had some jazz there, but you really took the soul and blues over there and gave it to them. And tell us a little bit about how long these trips were, what it was like to be there.
Well, I was first introduced to Singapore by a young lady that lives here in East St. Louis. There were several that had the opportunity to go over, and that was Miss Denise Times and Zelphia Robinson Otis. That's the one that's responsible for my going to Singapore. She had gone over, and the tour was 3 months at a time. So she had been there 9 months because the other people didn't show up. So she called me. She said, Renee, I didn't even know who she was, but she had been to all of my shows. She would come, and I knew her from wearing hats. And she says, well, I'm the lady to wear the hats all the time that you're always trying to get. I said, now I remember it. But she says, well, I'm calling you from Singapore. First of all, what is Singapore? Because, you know, I'm in East St. Louis. I don't know anything about a Singapore. And she explained everything to me. I said, well, sounds promising. She said, well, if you just take the torch, she said, I'm going to hand you the challenge to come to Singapore. So the requirements to go to Singapore were a package, which included your photo, your bio, your CD, or whatever you had singing on the tape. So I spoke with the people that were hiring me over the phone from Singapore. So the young man asked me if I was interested in coming. I said, well, I'll take that challenge. I don't have a problem. I'm not doing anything in East St. Louis. You know, I'm performing, but it would be an experience for me to get out of East St. Louis to see what's going on the other side of the world. So I went, I spoke with him and I told him, well, yeah, I'd be interested. So I said, well, I'll get my package ready for you. He says, there's no need. You don't need a package. He said, I can hear in your voice. You can sing. I got the job. I said, now, I didn't know you could hear in my voice I could sing. Can you all tell?
Yes.
Well, I can't. But anyway, that got me to Singapore. And when I went to Singapore, they told me, well, your ticket will be in the mail. You'll be there by next week. I'm like, that sounds good. And I was there for 3 months at a time. I started in 1998 going to Singapore. As a matter of fact, I brought in the millennium in 1999. I'm not going to ever be over there again for Christmas, okay? I'm going to tell you, when I got off the plane in Singapore, the heat hit me. I'm dressed, okay, because I'm just leaving home and it's in the winter. I get over there and the doors open to the outside and I just thought I was going to pass out. And it is hot like that all year long. You don't get cold at all. So you're walking in this heat and you have to acclimate to it, because if you don't, you'll be in what they call air con all day long, which is what we call air conditioning. But you'll be in your room all day. But I walked and I actually lost about 50 pounds over there because I walked every day in that heat and I sweat. But I acclimated and I felt much better as I walked. But I did at one time get some type of I don't know if it was a disease or, I know that I had to stay in my room, which was a hotel room. They provided everything for you. Everything was laid out for you. They treat you like, I thought I was Patti LaBelle when I got over there, because the red carpet was laid out and I'm walking down. I go, y'all don't know who I am. I told them I'm Renee Smith. So anyway, I didn't want them to get me confused with anybody else. So I told them who I was and where I was from. But I got sick, and they said there's some burning going on in Malaysia once a year. And it was coming over to Singapore, which wasn't far from us, right over the river. And I couldn't adjust to that. It had me really ill, so I stayed in my room for a week. And they paid me, y'all. They paid me. There's some good people over there. They paid me for that week. The doctors had to come in and see me. And they were giving me injections, and for a week, then after that week, he told me to come back to his office, so I was allowed to come out and breathe the air. And I got there, and they gave me a B12 shot, because I didn't think I could get off the bed at all. It was just horrible. So I don't know what that was, and if you go over, find out when they do the burning in Malaysia, don't go, because you're gonna get sick, okay? But they really treat you with royalty over there. I sang, they have this rotation system where they want to send you to Malaysia, they want to send you to Indonesia, they want to send you to Dubai. I loved Singapore, so that's where I stayed. I didn't rotate. I stayed and played in all the clubs there. They had one club called the Ice Club. Now, it was ice. I mean ice. For real. You're sitting on ice, and then the tables are iced. It was a good place to go in to cool off, but I couldn't stay in there. And I'd go in there just to cool off, and then I'll come out. But Singapore, I think everyone needs to go to Singapore. It's the cleanest place I've ever seen in my life. It's just clean. It's a trash can here. It's a trash can here. One here. There's no reason for anything to be on the ground. But do not take chewing gum over there, because they don't like chewing gum. They say chewing gum, and Americans don't know what to do with it. Because, we throw it on the ground. We step on it, and you got black spots all over the ground. That's where those black spots come from, chewing gum. So they don't really want you to bring the gum with intent to sell. I had so much gum, it wasn't funny in my bag, because I'm a gum chewer. And I was scared. I started selling it in the airports before I got there. Y'all want some gum? Then they didn't want to buy it, so I started giving it away. So I only took a couple of packs with me. But I had some friends from the Navy ships that were coming to see me. Renee, what do you want? Honey, they don't sell Seagram's gin. Bring me some Seagram's gin. They would bring them by the fifths. And I'd have, matter of fact, I left 3/5 over there because I couldn't drink them. But they brought that gin, baby, to me. And they brought me chewing gum. So I was good to go.
That's a great example of how people are treated somewhere else when they realize you're a great artist. You come back home and you work your regular stuff, but particularly a lot of blues players who've gone to Europe have found that they've been treated with such reverence, and they've have realized that the people knew all about it, knew all their songs, and would give anything to come and live in this area.
Yeah, can I just say one more thing? They're all cultures. All the cultures got together as one and made the Singapore. So it's just not Japanese, Chinese country. You have all cultures are there. So they all got together and said, we're going to name this Singapore. So it's not just one culture there. And they all know your music, believe me. They know it because they up singing it and dancing to it. Okay? I'm going to pass it on to one thing I want to say, but I'll pass it on to you.
Got one more question for Eric, and want to tell you once again, along with Marty Speicher, who's in the back here, this quartet is going to entertain you from noon to 1 o'clock. Don't miss this down on the bottom floor. You come out of the elevator here, and it's in the cafeteria area. It'll be a great concert, so you can hear them perform. We invite you to come down there after this session is over. Got one short question for Eric, because we got talking about Willie Clayton and you traveling on the road, and kind of a perception of the way St. Louis was thought of from your traveling around on the road.
Right. Well, we have a history of great musicians coming from here in all genres, jazz, hip hop, blues, all, and everything. And when I was working with Willie, half of the band was from St. Louis, actually. We had a drummer who works now with Kim Massey, Gerald Warren. He was actually the musical director. And we had, I think for a minute, we had Liddell Fitzpatrick on keys and Amos Brewer on saxophone, who's a great saxophonist from East St. Louis. But yeah, the perception everywhere is that we know the blues. You're from St. Louis, you know how to play the blues, and that's kind of true, But yeah, I don't know, but I don't want to make it like a nationalistic thing. I think that music is, it's not like that. It's not, first of all, I don't believe in categories. What I've noticed is like when you go back, you listen to people like you miss Lonnie Johnson, and people like that. You hear elements of jazz, you hear elements of blues, you hear elements of gospel. And I think now today, everybody wants to make everything into a category and a genre. And I think the people who play it, like when I would play the festivals and we'd see like Denise LaSalle, and then we see Coco Taylor, and then we see like Johnny Taylor. Those are very different kinds of bands, all under the umbrella of blues. And there's so many different ways that the music can go, and it's all beautiful. So I think that, and I noticed that when I went to New Orleans. I lived in New Orleans for about 8 years, and there was this guitarist down there named Snooks Eaglin, who I got to play with. He was like our Renee Smith, maybe, and he would play things that maybe Charlie Christian might play, in a solo. Like he would play the chord changes, and he'd also play what you think of as like traditional blues kind of licks. And I think Oliver was like that too. He had that jazz vocabulary, he had a blues vocabulary, he knew gospel music. And I think it's all just like the same thing in a way. It's funny because I kind of was misinformed when I first started. I was really into Jimi Hendrix. And through him, I would read magazines and I would like find out about Eric Clapton and people like that and the British invasion. And I didn't learn until later that they were all copying Howlin' Wolf and people like that. So really, that's blues. It's not, it's sort of an imaginary category, rock and roll. It's all kind of the same root. It's the same thing,
All right, I'll tell you.
One more thing?
Sure.
Just one more thing. I want you to know that I didn't start in life singing the blues. I started gospel. Okay, and I'm still in church. I do sing at my church. And you're invited, 2235 Bond Avenue, Mount Zion Missionary Baptist. I am still there. I want you to know that, okay? Oh, and I could not see, my mom is back there. My mom's going to turn 85 years old in April. Hi, Mama. Look, don't be looking around, Mama. But Mama, when I first started singing, my mother and my sister would sing together, and I would join them, and they would stop because I couldn't sing. She said, honey, you just can't sing. So all of a sudden, she says, you just came from nowhere and just started singing. So now I'm out singing them. Thank you, Lord.
I did want to say we also have a couple of distinguished musicians in the house, a couple old friends. Riley Cody was a great guitar player here, and his lovely daughter Takora and Riley Jr., the bass player and drummer here. The dear friends, great musicians. They kept George playing the low-down stuff. So yes.
I just wanted to shout out Brooklyn, Illinois, because that's where Albert King was from.
Yes.
The oldest African-American incorporated entity in the U.S. Brooklyn, Illinois.
Brooklyn and Brooklyn's had a lot of names because part of it was Lovejoy. All right.
That's the honorary mayor of Brooklyn right there.
It was also known as Newport in 1925, and James Steady Roll Johnson made a record called Newport Blues, and he told people later on, he said he moved to Brooklyn. They thought he'd gone to New York. He was over here. So anyhow, we've got some food in the back. We invite you to have some food. And then at around 12, come on downstairs and hear a great concert. It's been our pleasure to be here once again. Let us acknowledge Mr. Gus Thornton, ladies and gentlemen. Miss Renee Smith. Mr. Eric Slaughter. Ethan Leinwand. I want to thank Rick and Mary Kay and those of the individuals here at Southwestern Illinois College, SWIC, I believe is how you say it. I was with UMSL for 41 years, so we love these little acronyms. But anyway, it's been a pleasure. My name is Ron Edwards, and we have some both blues letters, and I brought some cards from 88.1 KDHX right now. Gabriel, who is the king of the blues and oldies, is on at midnight on Sundays. Almost all of us grew up listening to him. There are 6 blues programs, Monday, Thursday, Friday drive time. And then we have Sunday night, 2 in the evening, Chicken Shack Alley, and I'm on at 8 o'clock Sunday night. Gabriel's on at midnight. And we have a distinguished person from the station, Mr. Hound Dog Brown, who also lives in Illinois. You can get up at 5 a.m. Or if you got a computer, you can sleep in and then listen to him later. With Boogie On Down with Hound Dog Brown, he plays a lot of blues. 5 a.m. on Thursdays does also. And Mary Kay was a programmer at the station. These are all volunteers, and you get to play exactly what you want to play. I'm working on the 293rd consecutive week of themes, and I haven't decided what it's going to be. But I'm really thinking that it's going to be something associated with what you saw here today to kind of go over it. Anyway, here is a card. We invite you to take it, pick it up and listen to it. And when you call the air room, you get us. It's absolutely amazing. People fall down. You're speaking. We're there. We started in the country, broadcast from a transmitter. When somebody called, we could hear the transmitter humming. So we've been on the air with 43,000 watts for 27 years. It goes out 90 miles in a circle. It is one of the biggest community radio stations in the United States, one of only 4 that got a grant out of CBS, or the Corporation of Public Broadcasting. But we have put more blues on the radio. There's 3 of us in year 28, 2 of us in year 25, and the 6th one is in his 22nd year. So they can't get rid of us. But we invite you to listen to some blues. So thanks so much for coming. It's been a pleasure.
One thing I wanted to recognize Marty back here. The band's playing down there at 12. It didn't just magically get set up down there. Thank you so much, Marty, for getting everything set up.
Thank you, Marty.
And again, Ron, thank you for moderating all of this. So.
It's been a pleasure.
we don't want any food to go to waste, so make sure you fill up a plate of food, and you can take it downstairs and listen to the band.